I can imagine a circumstance where Trump decides he's going to pardon virtually everybody in the J6 proceedings, and in the process drops in Hunter's name. But at the same time, if he wasn't the president's son, he's a pathetic figure. This guy's just sort of a tragic human being. I'm much more upset about Jack Smith, who had been reprimanded 9-0 by the Supreme Court for trying to destroy a Republican governor, and spent several years, and I saw a number this morning estimating $90 million trying to destroy Trump. I certainly think we should know about that. We should know everything about the relationship between Atlanta and New York and the White House on going after Trump. But that's why I start with the idea, let's first have a commission of inquiry, get all the facts out in the open, and then based on what we learn from the facts, let's look at what should be done.
All right, welcome to the Sean Spicer Show. We're 2 days away from Thanksgiving. I hope you and your family are getting ready to celebrate and enjoying the holiday. This is the kickoff to the holiday season. I love Thanksgiving. It's no shopping. You're not buying Thanksgiving gifts. Enjoy it. But man, what a day. Never a boring day. Donald Trump talking about tariffs yesterday. Walmart backing down. Jack Smith backs down. It was pretty big. Newt Gingrich and Jim McLaughlin are here. The president's pollster and the former speaker are going to give us some unbelievable insight. Before we get to that, a lot of names in the news. Let me give you one really good one that's not running for anything. Leo Grillo, my buddy at Delta Rescue. You guys know this if you've been watching the show for a while. I met Leo a while ago. I was telling him about my experience with rescuing dogs, and he said, Sean, Delta Rescue is a no-kill sanctuary for life. It's not a shelter. We're not trying to find them new homes. We look out for abandoned, malnutritioned, abused, neglected animals, dogs, cats, horses, you name it. We bring them all to this sanctuary, and it's a no-kill sanctuary for life. Makes it very, very different. And Leo has grown Delta Rescue over the years. It's amazing the work they do there. If you go to deltarescue.org, you'll see what I'm talking about. But he's not looking for a government handout. He's looking for people like me and you to help lend a hand to a cause that we support. If you can go to Delta Rescue and make a contribution, that would be greatly appreciated. But more than that, which is appreciated, obviously, but go to the estate planning kit tab at the top. And maybe you have a 401k, a piece of property, an IRA, whatever, and you're trying to figure out what to do with it as part of your estate or your legacy. Think about making that part of the legacy of Delta Rescue, that it can go on for generations to come. And there may be some kind of tax benefit to help you while you're still on Earth. How's that? Win-win. Help Delta Rescue, help you out in your short term. So go to deltarescue.org, hit that estate tab, think about it, pray about it, please consider it. All right. Now, let's get back to this. Jack Smith, surprise announcement, drops all charges. And by the way, he's now against President Trump, and he's expected to resign. I would too. I'm a little concerned about that. If you did that. But this is great news for President Trump heading into his new term, not worried about that cloud of bogus charges hanging over his head. Then President Trump threatening tariffs against China, Mexico, and Canada because they're not controlling their borders and allowing fentanyl to come in. Now, how awesome is that? They will have their economies crippled if he goes through with this, and they know it. This is how this guy negotiates. He'll say, great, day one, I'm doing this. So the clock is ticking now. Either you guys get control of your border, get control of the fentanyl flowing into our country, affecting our people, or I'll suffer. I'll make your economy suffer. This is hardball, my friends. I love it. And then lastly, a quick update from our friend Robbie Starbuck. Walmart has backed down of their DEI policies because he was going to expose them. They're no longer in the DEI game. They're back to doing what they're supposed to do, selling us stuff. That's what businesses should be focused on, not worrying about woke this and that. Anyway, a lot to get into with Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich and the president's pollster, Jim McLaughlin. Before I get to Newt, let me just tell you, the Democrats are still in charge. You guys know that. Tax Network USA is out there to help if you get one of these notices from the IRS, a knock on your door. Maybe they call you, they send you what they call a pay up notice. There's 50,000 new IRS agents, and they're not twiddling their thumbs. They have all the resources of the federal government to come after you. I don't mean to scare you, because if they do that, don't think you can do it alone. You need professional help. I think the best in the business are the folks at Tax Network USA. They know all the agents. They know which ones to work with, which ones will never help you out. And they use their years of experience where they've recovered over $1 billion for their clients to help you. So if you get one of these notices, contact them. Go to tnusa.com/Sean Spicer, full name. tnusa.com/Sean Spicer. Do not try to go at the IRS by yourself. You will not win. These guys play for keeps. All right, without further ado, I want to begin the conversation with Newt Gingrich. Then I want to bring in Jim McLaughlin's, the president's pollster, to talk about where we are and how much support he has for these issues. Without further ado, though, I want to bring in the Speaker of the House, the host of Newt's World, and the author of Gingrich 360, the newsletter Substack that he has all the time. Great read, Speaker Newt Gingrich. Mr. Speaker, always good to see you. Great to see you at Mar-a-Lago last week, you and Ambassador Gingrich, right there at the head table, right in the mix of things.
It was pretty wild. I think in some ways, seeing some of the actors who were there, and it was a pretty exciting evening. We were sitting across from President Trump, so that's always kind of a remarkable moment. And we had a great time. We were there for 3 days for the American Foreign Policy Institute meetings. And then, of course, we were there for dinner with the president. And he was very generous during his talk afterwards. So pretty hard to beat.
Yeah, nice place to have dinner. I got to sit next to Mark Lauder, which was, equally nice, but a little different of a dinner conversation. Let me ask you this. On a scale, if you were Professor Gingrich back in your old days and had to grade this transition, what grade would you give it so far?
Probably an A+. The one thing that looked like a mistake was, in fact, I think, well thought out and worked pretty well. Gates is out of the Congress. He managed to increase the value of having the former Attorney General from Florida, Pam Bondi, become the Attorney General, and it made it easier for the Senate to decide that she was terrific. And to have, I think Pete Hegseth has got to weather the storm. But so far, it looks to me like the sort of he said, she said stuff isn't dispositive in terms of stopping him from becoming Secretary of Defense. The rest have all been terrific. They're not always the person I would have picked, but a very solid team. In fact, I'm writing about it as kind of a cabinet, the first real cabinet of entrepreneurs since Franklin Roosevelt drove business people out of power and replaced them with bureaucrats and academics.
Yeah, I want to pick up on a few of the threads that you just mentioned one at a time. Let me start with Pam Bondi, and then I want to get to experience, and then I want to get to Pete Hegseth. So let's start with Pam Bondi. I know you commented about the number of, saw a great picture on your Instagram. You and Ambassador Gingrich both posted it, and you've updated it as Mark Cuban questioned whether or not Trump likes to surround himself with strong women. And you and Ambassador Gingrich both posted a picture and continue to show iterations of it as it gets stronger and stronger with people like Pam Bondi, Susie Wiles, Elise Stefanik, Tulsi Gabbard, Kristi Noem, Caroline Leavitt, Linda McMahon. I mean, it's such a dumb comment to make when you realize how silly it is on its face.
Well, Callista came up with that, and that was her newsletter article that I then reposted. But I'm trying to convince her that in about another 10 days, she can do a second edition and say, as I was saying, and have a whole new list of people, because it was really a stupid comment by Cuba. Trump has never worried about having strong women around him. And he, frankly, as you know, he often pays more attention to them than to equally strong men.
Yeah, well, especially Mrs. Trump. I mean, I've told people she is probably hands down the most influential person in his life when it comes to advice. And I would advise anybody heading back into a second Trump administration, when she puts her opinion on the table, listen very carefully to it.
That's right.
He between her and Ivanka, I mean, he's surrounded himself with strong women. But let's pull the next thread for a second. Pete Hegseth. With Gates gone, does he become the next target?
Well, look, I think they're going to be conflicted because Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Has sufficient views, particularly on things like fluoridation. And I think he's going to be actually a much bigger threat to the food manufacturers than he is to the pharmaceuticals. So we'll see how much resistance they can drum up. As I think you guys noticed the other morning on the 9 o'clock call, about 80% of Republicans favor him.
Yep.
And about 48% of Democrats favor him. So I suspect he'll be all right in the end.
When,
There's
when, when you mentioned big food, take me back to your days as a member of Congress. Like, is that something that they're going to start calling up their members of Congress and saying, "Hey guys, we contribute a lot of money to you. I know he wants to deal with these processed foods. I've contributed to your campaign. I need you to help fight."
Yeah, my experience was it was never quite that blatant. It was, we're good friends and, we've golfed together and, my company does a lot of good things and, it's a household name. You don't really want to cripple us. It's more like that. The underlying notion of who supports who is there, but it's very seldom quite, or at least when I was there, wasn't nearly as blatant as you described it. It's not quite so much a quid pro quo as it is a fraternity. We all go to the Ag Open and we all hang out together. And like the people who have ice cream day at the every year, they're hoping you'll remember to love them fondly. And I think the challenge they've got is when you look at the number of additives in American food and say European food, it's staggering how big the difference is. And that's where I think Kennedy may actually make a difference just in making noise and getting people to start saying, wait a second, why is this true? I mean, the pharmaceuticals are much more muscular. Part of their power is just the sheer volume of advertising they buy. I mean, what network wants to get in a head-on fight with all the big pharma and see them take away all their ads? But on the other hand, they're also they're permanently sort of behind the eight ball because people pay for it. People notice the prices, so people tend to be slightly more resentful of how much it costs than they are grateful that it exists. And I think that's a balance. But I mean, Robert Kennedy, in a normal environment, I think Kennedy would have a harder time in this environment. The people who have decided they're for Trump, and you can check me on this if you don't agree, they really believe Trump is the spearhead of fundamentally changing a system that frightens them and makes them very angry. And so they are not inclined. I mean, if they didn't back off during the arrests and during the photos and during the impeachments, and you can go down the list, they ain't going to back off because he picks Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or he picks Tulsi Gabbard. And I think Tulsi has a little more of a challenge. I like her very much personally. And she's got to be able to explain some of her foreign trips and whether or not she was making any money and whether or not she reported it. But if she can explain it, she'll get through. And candidly, my bias, and as you know, I've done this a long time, my bias is the system is so sick, so incestuous, so filled with waste and corruption that bringing in some genuine outsiders and having them for a little while run amok is probably good because you need to break up the kind of insider deals that have really become an enormous, I think, weakness in the American system.
Well, that gets me back to the Heth question. The Washington media and the left loves to throw around the term qualification. So let's look at Pete Hegseth's qualification. 2 Bronze Stars, a tour in Gitmo, Afghanistan, Iraq, graduate of Princeton and Harvard. Sounds pretty qualified. He ran a VSO, a Veteran Service Organization, Concerned Veterans for America, but he's not from the defense industrial complex, right? And that's where I look at someone, I go, wait a second. So Pete Buttigieg, who was 37 at the time, mayor of South Bend, Indiana, with 66 buses, he's qualified to run the Department of Transportation. Dennis McDonough never served in the military, is qualified to run the VA, the Veterans Administration, never dealt with housing, lending, or healthcare, the 2 greatest services provided by the VA. And yet he's qualified. And suddenly now, but I think it's a dog whistle, right? That's what to me, it's what you were just referring to. It's these guys are going to break up business as usual. And so we got to find a way of expressing that without really saying that we just don't like them.
Well, look, I mean, let's stick with the DOD for a minute. When Boeing gets away with charging 8,000% more for something to put in the C-17 than it costs, 8,000%, there's something profoundly wrong. When SpaceX can take a satellite to Jupiter for 10% of what Boeing was going to charge, there's something profoundly wrong. When Milley is wrong on everything, I mean, it is embarrassing how bad he was as chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He was wrong about Afghanistan. It was a fiasco the way we withdrew. People should have been, frankly, summarily dismissed from the service. He was wrong about Ukraine. He's the guy who said the Russians will be in Kyiv in 3 days. And so I don't necessarily want somebody who is a professional, quote unquote, in a system of defeat, failure, and corruption. I want somebody who's an outsider, who's going to ask common sense questions, and is going to force change. Now, I'm a little discouraged that Pete has, Princeton and Harvard. I mean, the degree to which we really always have to go to the Ivy League. But on the other hand, if you'd walked in and just listed his qualifications, very few people would have said that he's not qualified to do something pretty big.
Yeah, I just think this is a dog whistle, though. He's qualified, but they just don't. They don't want to say. I mean, they got through a ton of people who were clearly not qualified, but suddenly that's the new bar because he's not going to support the status quo.
Look, I mean, you had to deal with the press at a much more intimate level than I did, so you may be more comfortable with them. I describe most of the press as the propaganda media.
Yep.
They are the offensive arm of the Democratic Party. They have zero claim to being neutral. So if you say to me, they send in an idiot to do a job, and as long as he's a liberal Democrat, they all applaud. They send in a brilliant person to do a job, and if he's a Trump Republican, they attack him. I would say to you, yes, that tells you who they are. And I fully expect them to be hysterically one-sided. Maybe not quite as bad as the State Department providing crying rooms for diplomats who are so shaken by the Trump victory. I mean, you have to wonder, if you're a diplomat who has to have a crying room over a presidential election, should we really send you to Nigeria? I mean,
or anywhere.
Or anywhere. I mean, you're going to face a lot bigger problems in the world than an American presidential election.
So when Trump, we've spoken a lot on personnel. Let's talk policy for a second. When he gets in, there's some things that he has to do and some things that he wants to do. Walk us through what you think the first, month needs to look like in terms of what does he need to be doing policy-wise, and what does he have to do?
Well, I mean, the opening day will be border, and deport. I mean, it'll be a series of executive orders that profoundly, overnight, change our relationship with illegal immigrants. And he has to do that, and his base totally expects it. And he wants to do that, I think. I think next that he's going to deal with tariffs, and I thought you guys on the 9 o'clock call did a pretty good job of really trying to think through to what degree is he raising the tariff issue to start the negotiation, and to what degree is he raising it because he's actually going to do it. And I think people need to remember, he's a very good negotiator. He wrote a book called The Art of the Deal, and an even better book called The Art of the Comeback. And he understands how to go into these are business, in his mind, these are business meetings. And he has the largest market in the world. Therefore, he has all the leverage. He can find other countries to buy from. You can't find other countries to sell to. And the damage he may do to the Chinese economy is staggering, because they're really right at they have two huge problems. One is demographic. The one-child policy is now really beginning to eliminate the workforce and reduce dramatically their population. And the other is that they set up this Ponzi scheme of raising money for local governments based on property, and the amount of debt they build up is just breathtaking. So if they get hit with any serious tariffs and their exports slow down dramatically, they have a huge problem, and Trump knows that, and he gives him a lot more leverage than people like Biden and Harris understood. I think he will move very early on a variety of conflicts around the world and try to make an imprint. He wants to be the peacemaker. He sees a great opportunity here. While he's aggressive, he doesn't want to be a warrior. He wants to have the capacity to fight if he has to. But much like Reagan, he really wants to find ways to get you to do what he wants without war. And I think that he will move on Ukraine. He may encourage the Israelis to take out the Iranian dictatorship because there's no long-term solution as long as the Ayatollahs are in charge. But I think everywhere else he's going to try to find a way to get to peace. And I think that's a significant opportunities in the world. We're also faced, by the way, with a real decay in Cuba, where the electric generating system is collapsing because it's a Soviet era system with no parts. And they literally are going to have blackouts constantly. And there's now maybe an opportunity in Venezuela where the economy is really beginning to crumble under the collapse of the oil industry. And so he may have a very interesting period of being on offense. I personally believe, this is a sign of my youth with Ronald Reagan when I was a junior congressman, the number one, number two, and number three things they've got to get done to have a chance to win in 26 and 28 is passing a really large tax cut and regulatory reform bill. I mean, I think that, and that means, in my judgment, that for the first 3 or 4 months of the year, every cabinet officer, this is what Baker did for Reagan when he told the cabinet, all of you will make speeches on the tax cut. None of you will bring in any ideas beyond the tax cut until we pass the tax cut. And as you may remember, although you were a bit young at that stage, but we had, I think we got about 1/3 of the Democratic vote for the Reagan tax cuts because they couldn't go back home and vote no. And I think they have to design some kind of campaign that reaches the average American and convinces them that they have to pressure the Congress to do what Trump wants on taxes and economic growth. If they can pull that off, and if they have a booming economy in 26, then I think you could have an FDR kind of realignment. But if they can't pull that off, then I think this could be a blip, and you could see us gradually, slide back towards some kind of traditional establishment in 24, and 26, and 28.
All right, so that's the policy. I think you're right. I mean, he's got to deal with the taxes. They're expiring. They're his tax cuts from his first term. So he's got to deal with them. The regulatory stuff, 100%. The immigration stuff, 100%. Let's talk about like retribution, though. There's a lot of talk among Trump and Trump allies about going after people that wrong them. Particularly, you mentioned General Milley, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Some have suggested that he be court-martialed. You are no stranger to the defense world, national security. What would you advise him to do with respect to somebody like General Milley and some of these other officers that he believes should be recalled?
Well, look, I mean, I would focus in 3 places: the Justice Department, the January 6th committee, and the Defense Department. And I would, in all 3 cases, start with a commission of inquiry. I mean, who was so totally screwed up in Afghanistan? What exactly was going on? I mean, what Milley did in calling the Chinese defense minister was very close to treason. I mean, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs doesn't have the authority under our Constitution to directly undermine the commander-in-chief. And frankly, some of the things Milley did were beyond the pale. We should know who screwed up Afghanistan. I mean, that withdrawal was humiliating, and it was a display of weakness. And I think it was a significant factor in the thinking by the Russians and others about how much they could be on offense. Well, somebody ought to be held accountable. Nobody's been held accountable. We've become a country where nobody learns in your school, so we pay you anyway. You can't do anything militarily, so we salute you. You go down the list. There are no consequences in America today for government failure, except that they get a pension and they get a nice party and they get to go home.
So let's take a case like Hunter Biden. Do you pardon him, or do you say, "Hey, sorry, dude, your justice system made their rendering. You're on your own"? I mean, some people are suggesting that that's a great way to tip their hat at Biden, to make bygones be bygones, to repair relationships. But Hunter Biden was offered a sweetheart deal and turned it down. So to some extent, I mean, he had his chance.
Well, I mean, I can imagine a circumstance where Trump decides he's going to pardon virtually everybody in the J6 proceedings, and in the process drops in Hunter's name and says, "Okay, I'm a generous guy. I'm concerned on a bipartisan basis. Now, how many of you Democrats want to raise Cain about this?" I can imagine that. I wouldn't particularly be for pardoning him by himself, but at the same time, if he wasn't the president's son, he's a pathetic figure. I mean, the pictures of him laying in bed, with cocaine and all that stuff. This guy's just sort of a tragic human being. And
Right.
I don't know the way I'm much more upset about Jack Smith, who had been reprimanded 9-0 by the Supreme Court for trying to destroy a Republican governor and spent several years, and I saw a number this morning estimating $90 million trying to destroy Trump. I certainly think we should know about that. We should know everything about the relationship between Atlanta and New York and the White House on going after Trump. But that's why I start with the idea, let's first have a commission of inquiry, get all the facts out in the open, and then based on what we learn from the facts, let's look at what should be done.
So there's a lot of rumors about who we might install in different positions. Do you think that sends shockwaves through DOJ? I mean, like you got Pete Hegseth at DOD, you got Pam Bondi now at AG, and we're talking about some potential new nominees for FBI. If you're the Washington establishment, are you worried about what's coming down the pike?
Yeah, I think if you aren't already in a state of shock over the election, you will be in a state of shock over the nominations, but they should be. I mean, these are insider. But look at the news media and the degree to which it cooperated in a totally dishonest Russia hoax. It cooperated in a totally dishonest cover-up of the Hunter Biden laptop. I mean, every time you turn around, the elite media has been guilty of betraying its trust to the American people and its trust to the American system, and has sold out for ideological warfare. I think they should be embarrassed and they should be worried. And I think you have to send in tough people. You have to send in people who understand going in that most of the people who work for you voted for the other team. Pompeo once said to me that they'd figured out late in his secretaryship that the State Department was like Fort Apache, the Bronx. There were about 25 people on Pompeo's side, and then lots and lots of people trying to destroy what they were doing. And I think part of the goal of this administration has to be to break up that kind of incestuous left-wing establishmentarian thinking.
Mr. Speaker, last question. The House is now on a razor's edge majority-wise. He's got 3 members at least going to his administration. Just put your head in Speaker Johnson's place for a second. What does he have to say to keep the troops together, to keep them from fracturing as they deal with these policy initiatives down that they may not be 100% on board?
Well, I think first of all, he's got to be very careful, which he has been. I'm very impressed with the job that he's doing. I could not have done it. It requires a level of patience at listening to every single person, no matter how idiotic, and just cheerfully listening, hour after hour of listening. I think that he has to figure out what are the boundaries of what's possible, even with Trump's support, because Trump will learn fairly quickly that both in the House and the Senate, you have independently elected people. When I was at my peak, which was I was a relatively strong speaker,
Yes.
I still had guys who come up to me, for personal friends of mine, who'd come up to me and say, "Gosh, I just can't be with you today." And I'd say to them, "I really need you." And they say, "I know, but I can't do it." And both President Trump and Vice President Vance and Speaker Johnson will learn that they had better figure out how to get some Democrats, which again was part of the Reagan genius, and part of what we did. When we passed welfare reform, because we had won with the American people, we split the Democrats evenly. It was 101 yes, 101 no on welfare reform, which for many Democrats had been, a very big heartburn issue. So I think they've got to listen to the American people, rally the American people, and drop everything into 2 groups. Easy to do, fine, just get it done. Really hard to do, then it has to be a 30, 60, 90-day campaign. You have to arouse the grassroots. They have to bring pressure to bear, and the members have to have no choice. Those are the 2 categories you're going to operate in.
I love it. Anyway, that's great advice. I hope he listens. We'll send it to him. Speaker Gingrich, always glad to have you on the show. Great seeing you and Ambassador Gingrich down at Mar-a-Lago.
Good to see you.
You bet. All right, what a great conversation with New. Before I bring in the president's pollster, Jim McLaughlin, I want to tell you about, listen, there's a lot of Democrats that are having some gut issues, and maybe we'll have some after Thanksgiving, but it's interesting because 70 to 80% of Americans suffer from a bad gut problem, right? And so it affects everything, your mood, your skin, your sleep. So much comes from that. I talked to Tina Anderson from Just Thrive a couple times on the show, you may recall, and she was telling me, I said, oh, Tina, guess what? I take a probiotic. And she was like, that's great. I know you're trying. I felt like I was being schooled here. And she said, but did you know that almost 90% of all probiotics don't make it through the stomach to the intestine? So you're taking something which is good, but it's not actually effective, which is why I was so excited to hear about the Just Thrive products, especially their probiotic, because these things are backed by more research than anything else on the market. It's unbelievable. They've got the ultimate products out there. And the cool part is that for a limited time, you can go to justthrivehealth.com and get either the Just Thrive probiotic, which again, if you're going to take one, you might as well take one that works, or their Just Calm, which is equally good. I love both. You can save 20% off either one of them or both. By the way, I mean, it's the holiday season. Why not get someone else, even yourself, on the right track? That's a gift worth giving. So go to justthrivehealth.com, use promo code SPICER for 20% off your entire order. And by the way, I told you before, I take the gummies. Those are included as well. Get the 90-day one because you're going to love them and you're going to want to take them. All right. Without further ado, I want to bring in our buddy, our friend, the president's pollster, Jim McLaughlin. Jim, good to see you.
Sean, it's great to be here.
How excited are you for Thanksgiving when you get to give thanks for all the great work that culminated in a huge, huge win?
Oh gosh. You know what? If we didn't win, I would be in the fetal position right now, Sean.
Still.
For a lot of different reasons, not the least of which was I really believe that Donald Trump is going to save the republic. But, this has been a long journey for my brother John and I. We've been with President Trump since going back to 2011, believe it or not. He was thinking about running against Barack Obama back then. So the fact that it culminated with such a big victory, not but just for Donald Trump, but for the Republican Party on November 5th, it feels good.
So, I've said this before on the show. The loyal listeners have heard me say this. When reporters call me and say, how did we miss this? I say, we didn't, you did. And you and John and Tony Fabrizio were putting out this kind of information. And I feel like now you've got to feel a sense of redemption, like saying, yeah, we got this. But were you surprised at all about any of the demographic information, how well he did with Hispanics or blacks or whatever? I mean, was there a group that you said, wow, we thought he was going to do better, but not that well?
Yep. And look, there were no surprises. And that was one of the questions that we were even asking ourselves was that, okay, are we going to keep these percentages of black voters? Are we going to keep these percentages of Hispanic voters? And obviously we did. And that was one of the things we talked about before the election, Sean, was we talked about it on this show. We predicted it on this show where I said, black people and brown people were literally going to save the country. And they did. And they couldn't get gaslighted by the, left stream media or by the Democratic Party. They knew they weren't doing as well as they were 4 years ago. They made that direct comparison between Donald Trump, between Kamala Harris, and they voted for not just Donald Trump, but they voted for the Republicans to maintain control of the House and also to win back the U.S. Senate. So nothing really surprised us on election day. And look, we all know Donald Trump built a new coalition for Republicans to build on between now and over the next 2 years and 4 years.
Yeah, I want to pull on that for just a second, because is this unique to Donald Trump, what he did on election night, or is it something that other Republicans can build off of?
Yeah. And look, you got to give Donald Trump all the credit in the world, because I tell everybody, the old saying, they say that losing's an orphan and winning has 1,000 fathers. But the guy who deserves the most credit for this is obviously Donald Trump, because nobody turns out Republican voters better than Donald Trump. But not just Republican voters, but right of center leaning independents. Because what you had was a lot of voters were really dissatisfied with what was going on in the country. And like the first piece of empirical data, forget, the polls that, Tony Fabrizio and my brother John and I were releasing before the election that said, hey, Donald Trump is ahead here. Not by a lot, but we said he had a durable lead here. But was that big number when it was one of the first numbers that came out from the exit polls? 70% of Americans said the country was off on the wrong track. And that's when we knew, because the voters wanted change. They didn't like the direction that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden were taking the country on a whole host of issues. It wasn't just one issue. Yes, everybody was concerned about the economy, but it was also immigration. It was things like crime. It was obviously the wars that were breaking out throughout the world. And look, the voters, that's what they voted on. And that was the path to victory for the Republicans, was issues-based.
Right, but if you're down ticket, you're riding his coattails. When it comes to the midterms, can a random Republican congressional candidate or Senate candidate go in and say, great, I can now count on the support from these same communities and constituencies that Trump got? Or is this unique to Trump?
Yep. And look, that's going to be one of the biggest things, because we talked about that, during the midterms, during Donald Trump's first presidency. Depending upon whose numbers you believe, there was about 9 to 11 million Trump voters that stayed home during those midterm elections. And we always know, obviously, turnout is lower during those midterms. And that's going to be the challenge for Republicans going into those elections, is because you've got to defy history, because history tells you, whether it was somebody like Bill Clinton during his first term, when he lost 50 some odd seats and they lost the Senate and whatnot. Barack Obama, they lost over 60 seats during his first midterm. But then you saw somebody like Bill Clinton back in 98 during that, during the midterm elections, where after the first one, after the second one, they actually defied history and they picked up seats during impeachment. And George W. Bush did the same thing back in 2002, where there was a sense the economy was doing well, and it was after September 11th. So that is going to be a big challenge here. And look, Donald Trump got a record for a Republican candidate. Look, we're over 77 million. We could get 78 million. It's quite honestly, it's a sin that they're still counting votes in some parts of the country, almost all pretty much blue states. But we've got to go, and I call it's the politics of performance, Sean. We've got to perform. We've got to give voters a sense the economy's getting better. We're going to fix the immigration problem, and we need for people to feel safer, in terms of what's going on with Ukraine and Russia and the Middle East, et cetera, not to mention what's going on in, with China.
So I was a little shocked when I saw this CBS YouGov poll earlier this week that showed 57% of Americans support Donald Trump deporting people in this country illegally.
Yeah.
Do you, as a pollster, if you're giving advice to somebody now, say, be careful on this, because it's one thing in theory. The second that NBC News and the Washington Post start doing story after story of Bobby, who's in this country for 25 years, suddenly being deported, the views are going to change. So be careful how, what is your advice to someone who reading that poll? Like, hey, take it at face value, or just remember that's in theory, not in practice.
And look, one of the beauties of Donald Trump is that he doesn't govern by polls. And you look at the folks that he's choosing for these cabinet positions and some of the non-cabinet positions. And the first name that comes to mind, especially with the immigration issue, is somebody like Tom Homan. And look, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden created such a mess when it came to the immigration problem that we have nowhere to go but up. And I will tell you something. You think back to what Donald Trump did in 2020. In 2016 versus Hillary Clinton, immigration was an important issue. It was about 1 out of 5 voters were telling us it was the most important issue in deciding their vote. In 2020, most of the exit polls didn't even ask about the issue of immigration. Why? Because Donald Trump had solved the problem. That's what I tell people. The two probably biggest issues going into the election on election day were cost of living and inflation, and immigration And the exit polls weren't even asking about that 4 years ago because Donald Trump had solved those problems. And look, I think whether it's Donald Trump, whether it's Tom Homan, whether it's the other experts he's going to be bringing in on the issue of immigration, they know what they're doing. They knew how to solve the problem. And by the way, a lot of these people solved the problem not just for Donald Trump, but they did it for Barack Obama. They did it for Bill Clinton. So he's bringing in a bipartisan team to be able to do this. And I think what the folks that Donald Trump has working on this issue is they understand it's not just a safety issue with folks, whether it's, terrorists coming across the border, whether it's murderers, rapists, drug dealers, etc. They also know it's a humanitarian issue. Look, one of the things that you point out, there's going to be the bias in the mainstream media on this issue. The Biden-Harris administration, they're trying to tell us how they're the party of women and the party of children. They lost 330,000 children. God knows what happened to those 330,000 children that were crossing the border. And you know what we're thinking. It's probably some sort of human trafficking that's going on, whether, with the cartels and everything else. That's where their focus is going to be. It's going to be on the criminals, and it's going to be, let's find out, let's try and make sure that we can make sure that these 330,000 children are going to be safe. And they're focusing on the humanitarian crisis that this administration had created because of their crazy, extreme, open borders immigration policies. It was just madness what they were doing when it came to the issue of immigration.
There's one more issue that I want to ask you about that I care about. I think our debt now has topped $36 trillion. It's the interest payments on the debt are almost exceeding what our payments for our national defense are, which is insane. Yes. So as a pollster, if a candidate like Donald Trump comes to you and say, okay, Jim, I want to tackle the debt. I understand how important getting control of this is for our future. But politicians get rewarded for giving them stuff, not from cutting things. What do you say?
Yep. And I say, look, Donald Trump gets it. Scott Bessent, his pick for Treasury Secretary, gets it. It's one of his points of emphasis of what they're going to be doing. They want to cut the wasteful spending. They want to cut the deficit. They want to cut the deficit and or the debt. And that's why he's working with people like whether it's Elon Musk or whether it's Vivek Ramaswamy, because Sean, you're 100% correct. The debt and the deficit and government spending was not a sexy issue during the campaign, but I think Donald Trump is going to make it a sexy issue when it comes to governing because they understand, look, whether it's our own households, we can't live with the kind of debt that this government has created. And the same thing is going on here. I mean, think about it. The debt that's been created, it's $100,000 for the average American, and it's $250,000 in debt that they've created for the average household. It's just too much. It's just unsustainable. And that's the great thing about where President Trump is going, where folks like Scott Bessent, they get it. They understand it. But the other thing they also understand is we have to grow the economy. We never solve our debt problems, our deficit problems without growing the economy. And that was one of the big problems with the Biden-Harris administration. They had no clue how to grow the economy because literally what Donald Trump wants to do is he wants to create more taxpayers. He wants wages to go up. People are going to pay more taxes. He wants more people that are going to be working. That's going to raise more tax revenues. And that's one of the dirty little secrets of Donald Trump's tax cuts is the year after they were implemented. Now, the Washington Post and the New York Times will tell you, oh, well, it's because he gave these tax cuts to the wealthy. And that's why revenues are down. That's why we have this big deficit. Revenues went up. They went up 6% the year after. Since the Trump tax cuts have been implemented, revenues are up almost 50%. What's the problem is we have a spending problem, not a taxing problem.
Yeah. All right. Make the debt sexy again. I'm getting hats. I'll send one to you. Jim McLaughlin, thanks for joining us as always. Really appreciate your perspective. I thank you as we give thanks this week for your continued support of the show and insight. So thank you. I hope you and your family have a great Thanksgiving.
Sean, I wish you and I wish the Spicer family a blessed Thanksgiving, and I love the show because
Oh,
it's
thank you.
way more in depth. And I'm not just a I'm not just a I'm also a viewer as well
I
as a guest. I love it.
that. Thank you. All right, guys. Thanks for being with us today. Tomorrow, Robert Wilkie, the former Secretary of the VA, is going to join us. But more importantly, he's leading the transition when it comes to the DOD and a lot of other areas. He's going to give us the ground truth, where the transition stands, personnel-wise, policy-wise, what's going to happen on day one. Woke generals, where are they going? What are the policies? Donald Trump's transgender policies. We're going to ask him the whole gamut. Tomorrow night at 6. Plus, we've got new shows for you Thursday and Friday. So gather the folks around on Thanksgiving. Watch the show at 6, same at on Friday. And later this month, we've got some great transition guests coming your way. Every night at 6 o'clock, hit that notification button, subscribe to the channel, watch it with the family, bring them together on Thanksgiving. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.